Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumburger channel. Strange music show that takes a different album each and every week, dives into it, generates discussion, and finds out how the music makes you feel when I listen to it. So in today's episode, we have of course returned to the randomizer, haven't we, for our user-suggested content, who spat out one of the many different suggestions we got from God Zilla, who on our video for both Jose Delgado's IX and on Sally Netchka's Music Not for Airports, asked if I'd heard of this particular album. At the time, the answer was no. I had never come across Two Lone Swordsmen at the time, but after today, I can gladly say I have heard this album and I've heard of Two Lone Swordsmen, and what an amazing thing that is, because this is truly fantastic, I have to say. Weird, squelchy, underwater electronic music that with very groovy bass in it as well. Truly awesome. So today I present Stay Down by Two Lone Swordsmen. So we of course ask ourselves, who are Two Lone Swordsmen? Well, Two Lone Swordsmen was an electronic music duo from London featuring Andrew Weatherall and Keith Tenniswood, active between the years of 1996 when the duo released their first album, to 2020 when Weatherall sadly passed away at the age of 56 due to a pulmonary embolism, thus bringing an end to the group as Tenniswood decided to just finish everything, which is a very sad way to start these things, but at the same time we have been left with a wonderful legacy of music from this duo, with there being a vast number of different albums under the Two Lone Swordsmen moniker, and what seems to be a bunch of different aliases as well, actually, according to Discogs at the very least. Cool stuff. So today we are taking a look at Stay Down, the band's second studio album, which was released on October 19th, 1998 on Warp Records. And this album, it offers up such a peculiar vibe of, very fantastic and fun electronic music, fusing together sections of ambient sound design with bass that ranges from funk to trip hop, and of course constant experimental electronic beats, that all combine together to give us such a wonderful journey into the depths of the waters themselves, surveying sunken tankers as fish swim all around you. It is a truly fantastic album, I have to say, that shot up as one of my favourite things I have heard as a result of starting the randomizer, so something excited to discuss, so let's dive in. So opening up with Hope We Never Surface, there's this kind of weird fluttering effect of peculiar sounds accompanied by a brief vocal sample before this very chilled out vibe establishes the scene, descending us beneath the very waves into this charming aquarium accompanied by the flickering of some sort of machine at work here. Everything feels distinctly chilled out though, just looping this little keyboard motif over and over whilst a medley of different sounds occurs all around us, presenting us with this very charming underwater vibe. It comes across as a lovely opening track, just pure electronic music that captures certain aesthetics of the trip-hop genre, which is one of my favourite genres that I've never really properly discussed. I briefly mentioned it in the new favourite albums list, actually. I'm very particular about trip-hop, but this track and a bunch of stuff on this album, it just really reminds me of it in such a charming way. But yeah, definitely a very cool opening track here that just gets the proceedings flowing very nicely. So we then move on to Ink Cloud. This further pushes this rather washed out aesthetic, literally as we get the sound of the sea rising up, before some electronic beats come in, pushing it all with these odd peculiarities. It quickly establishes another chilled out vibe, very down tempo, which kind of reminds me of some of the things you might have heard on the likes of 07 Simple Things, for example, only without vocals here from Two Lone Swordsmen. But there's some lovely tones and sounds that weave their way in and out of the composition though, such as these frazzling electronic sounds that twist their way right into your mind as they occur, as well as some nice experimentation with the sampling of vocals, creating this very peculiar and bordering on almost unsettling vibe, but one that I just can't help but find very enjoyable as it all occurs. Now, there's certainly many moments scattered throughout the track that surprise you, that keeps you on your toes with their odd levels of experimentation. But it is perhaps some of the charm of the music itself, not really knowing fully where it's all going to be headed as it occurs. Like, most of the music is just very relaxed, very calm and serene in it, but also very full of motion and movement. And there's certain motifs that snake their way through it all, throwing it all into levels of uncertainty, adding in just a little bit of apprehension. But overall, it's hard not to enjoy what is all occurring here, though. Truly wonderful. So our next track, The Big Clapper. So this one sounds a lot like the Lost soundtrack to The Clangers. Lots of warbling tones twisting in and around as they shoot up out of the ground, right up to the surface, accompanied by some lovely bass tones, of course, before the beats come in to help give it more of a skeletal structure. There's something weirdly fun and delightful about this one, kind of capturing the same aesthetics that I would get from watching the likes of The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou by Wes Anderson. Strange stop-motion sea creatures, or just the odd shots of everybody just swimming around under the water. It's what comes to mind when I hear this film, for example. Maybe it's probably because it's one of my favourite films, actually. Maybe in parts of the heavy aquatic vibe that's actually being presented on all the different songs here, though, from its very enigmatic album cover to the literal sounds presented on this album. It just feels like being under the water, essentially, traversing through strange, unusual spaces as the fish swim all around you. Very submerged under these cool blue waves, but very enjoyable as well, with just this very pleasant vibe overall. So the next track of Ivy and Lead, this one opens up with these bass notes just rising up and up before descending, leaving room for this very strange electronic beat to just start playing. An assortment of many different sounds all coming together before we get this very weird bassy number that comes through with a sort of melody. From there, it finds even more room for weirder stuff as it introduces this very high-pitched melody, sounding a little bit like a glockenspiel, maybe? But you know me, I have no idea when it ever is or isn't one of those things when it comes to this. But yes, with the persistence of that bassy note in the background looping over and over, this one actually has a very fun level of funk to it, I have to say. Kind of pushing those trip-hop vibes once more, as the rest of the instruments paint such an unusual picture as it all progresses. Now, for one that starts off so oddly, which isn't a bad thing, don't get me wrong, it certainly turns into something quite fascinating. Once again pushing that notion that you just never know what is going to happen when it comes to this album and its many different tracks. So our next track of We Changed the Frequency. This one starts off with what I can only describe as a reversing of sound effects, before a very prominent beat begins, a simple 4x4 beat broken up intermittently after a couple of rounds, whilst you have this weird little pitching thing occurring alongside this drone, before more bass notes come in to create a very squelchy and unusual environment. This once again reminds me of The Life Aquatic once more, in particular the scene where they're rushing to the island to rescue the hostages, something that has a certain level of intensity to it and motion and movement, but also this odd whimsical charm, this sense of just having a lot of fun creating weird sounds, and as a result creating some very weird music as a result, right? I have to say, there's certainly some very cool parts to this track, and it does seem like the two are having a lot of fun making it, but I have to admit that this particular one doesn't really pique my curiosity as much as some of the things we have already heard on this album. Now, it does fit in very nicely to the strange story that the duo is presenting on this album, but it might just be how this particular one is literally sounding, like the particulars of all the tones in the beast. It just doesn't interest me as much as some of the other tracks for some reason. But then again, I actually find this happens a lot with electronic music and electronic albums. Like, not everything appeals to me as much as other things. And I find I'm drawn to certain things more than other things, and what I like, I really like, and what I'm not as into, I just don't really enjoy all that much. But irrespective of that, this one is certainly a fun track, especially towards the end of it though, because you actually get an appearance of a weird cartoon sound that just sounds like it's getting slowed down more and more and more and more, creating a really weird outro that just comes right out of left field. A fantastic way to end it all, and worth the navigation of the entire track, I have to say, actually. Very peculiar, but definitely a lot of fun, which works well in favour of this track, actually, despite my opinions on it. Moving along, we get onto No Red Stopping, which is our longest track, around 6 minutes, which isn't long in the grand scheme of things, but for this album, it's just a point of fact. Anyway, this one immediately pushes the beat straight out at the forefront, as you get this kind of odd rush of sounds coming in out of the mix, reminding me of the kind of things that we either have heard or will hear on Describes the Music's Out Like a Candle Shattered Talisman topology, which I'll admit is creating a bit of a sort of traumatic flashback to me at this time. However, Two Lone Swordsmen have a bunch of low ends that they play around with that make it a lot more interesting for me to listen to. Especially when they add in some lovely ambient pads that just pushes the composition sonically. The tempo is almost ferocious on this one, actually, constantly pushing forward and forward with this constant and persistent beat. But it seems to open up so nicely when the dreamier layers, just come much more prominent. I think what makes so much of this one very interesting is the really funky bass that you have in the background of it all. Much of the song feels very dominated by that driving bass line, the persistent beats, and the more ambient pads forming the crux of the composition itself. And it plays over and over for, a large number of loops, creating this nice little environment to just get lost within for a few moments, unaware of space and time that all occurs. Another weird one that kind of just further pushes the confusion and peculiar imagery of the album presenting, further into the realms of the incomprehensible perhaps, but regardless, just so nice and fun to listen to, which is just such a grand thing, I have to say. So next we have Spine Bubbles. This one opens up with some really odd high frequencies, rattling in place for a few moments before the bass comes in, starting this little driving low end melody for the beat to just come in just all over it essentially, alongside these odd washed out instrumentals actually. And this one seems to bring us right back to the depths once more, watching the bubbles rise up and up towards the surface and marvelling in the odd spectacle of it. And it then finds room for some lovely odd experimentation, throwing in some weird vocal samples that seem to be affected in such bizarre and unusual ways. But I like this one though, because it seems to just drive forward more of that strange aquatic vibe, punctuated nicely by the bass guitar as it all occurs, still throwing in such strange abstractions in the form of these twirling little synth layers, and the occasional little peculiar sound that adds so nicely to the tones being presented across the album. It's another one that keeps you on your toes, further making you wonder and question what is going to be occurring and what is going on, but as it just further pulls you down and down into the depths as it's all occurring. I have to say, this actually might be one of my favourites from this album though, because I can't help but just enjoy the vibe that you're getting from the bass and or from the electronics, and it results in something that's just so charming and wonderful, and just wonderful stuff, I have to say. So our next track of Mr. Paris's Monsters, so kind of a down-tempo beat once again, and some nice peculiar lowercase noise set behind these weird squelchy sounds. Like small handheld objects spinning in kind of a ghostly voice that weaves in and out of the composition, beginning the main loop that forms the crux of the song itself. There's a bit of a change around 2/3 of the way through, just to kind of break up the repetitiveness that the composition would risk incurring, with it briefly ending on this weird broken down detuned telephone sound performed on the keyboard, I would assume, but I'm not 100% sure of course. It's a weirdly delightful texture when it does arrive, I have to say, although it does essentially signal the closing of this track. It's mostly enjoyable. Once again, this isn't an absolute favourite of mine, but I can't really fault it either way though. As it has this rather pleasant yet slightly ominous vibe as it all progresses, which fits so nicely within the aesthetic of the album. Like most of the tracks seem to be doing it, truth be told. Very playful characters, but with a bit of a dark undercurrent running behind it all. All in all, very nice though. So, our next track of Light the Last Flare. This one immediately opens up with those beats and a kind of jungle vibe with these distorted voices gurning away like Aphex Twin does on the likes of Window Licker. Before long though, it suddenly falters away, leaving space for a nice ambient interlude that seems to take over the entire composition, backed up by a delightful bass motif and a few squelchy electronic beats here and there. I have to say, I really, once again, like the bass sound on this one, which just grooves about in place whilst the rest of the electronics kind of establish that weird sub-nautical vibe once more of, donning your specialist scuba diving equipment and wandering through sunken wreckages. This one feels very playful once again though, throwing in some nice little motifs midway into the track that keeps everything on its toes once more, but with this oddly delightful vibe that still continues this kind of ominous sense of something lurking behind the shadows perhaps. But even with those ominous vibes, it's hard not to get swayed by the entire delightful nature that music is establishing. Truly wonderful. So moving swiftly along, we end up with the track We Discordians Must Stick Apart, which I have to say is a brilliant name for a track. So this one opens up so suddenly with this stab of synth layers, with a weird little bassy beat in the background playing over for a couple of bars before it suddenly opens up into this techno banger essentially, featuring some wonderful groovy bass as it loops these opening layers over and over the top of it. But there's some nice synth work which seems to travel all over the keyboard essentially, and it results in such an odd track that has such a wonderful groove to it once again. Now at 2 minutes, this is actually our shortest track on this album, and by the time it's all over, you actually kind of wonder, what the hell did I just witness passing by? Like, was it just like a shoal of fish that just goes thwomp right across your vision? Charming and brief, and another cool continuation of the album's concepts here. So our penultimate track of Alpha School. This one opens up with such an abstraction of beats, though, throwing in these weird into these weird esoteric places that remind me of the kind of breakdowns you get in the likes of Aphex Twin, where it's all bastardized sounds for a few moments and just goes really chaotic and nonsensical. That is until the composition just opens up, though, and we're thrown into that familiar territory of these rather spacey underwater beats. There's a wonderful drive on the bass here, and it seems like it's playing a little bit more minimally perhaps, but the way the sound expands in the ear alongside those beats makes for something truly delightful, I have to say. But it truly enters these wonderful areas when roughly about a third of the way into this one, you get this charming little keyboard melody that becomes a dominating factor of the composition, alongside the bass and the constant rattling of percussive elements. This one, as a result, feels so wonderfully chilled out though, which for me is surprising considering the very frantic energy that the beat seems to be opting for. But as odd and weird as it sounds, it's just delightful though, especially 2/3 of the way into this one actually, because you then get this lovely little weird electronica layer, which kind of sounds like an affected vocal or stringed instrument perhaps, distorted and stretched into these wonderfully weird gloopy shapes. Flying around the scene, just like in a wonderful fashion, like a school of jellyfish just floating all around you. It's just a wonderful vibe to this one, and I just can't help but be swayed by the entire thing, with it perhaps being another one of my favourites on this record. Charming and delightfully fun electronic music. With that though, we do get to our final track as Worldly Pleasures Wave Goodbye. So one more go around this weird aquatic journey of nonsense. And this one opens up with some weird little electronic drones filling up the scene with this rising static energy, as this almost mechanical beat occurs quietly behind it, setting the scene in a rather ominous way before a sudden drone comes in, introducing the scene to this weird electronic beat made up of these squelchy stretched tones and the smash of a cymbal, it seems. It's like the equipment used to generate all the beats and sound across this entire album has now become submerged under the water itself, distorting and washing it out in such a weird way as it descends further and further into the depths. It feels very odd, but a minute in you get this lovely heavy bass come in though, really dense, that just seems to begin this become this driving force for the composition. It's wonderful though, because it just lets the you get these droning ambient layers accompanying it as well, and with the bass as well. It's so my father would always say in these instances, it's thick enough to chew on essentially, and it creates something so wonderful to listen to. But as it progresses, it actually offers up a lot more ambient layers that create this very ethereal scene once more. Almost like we've now finished our work under the water and it's now time to start rising up to the top of the ocean, ready to break the waves and let the sun shine in. Almost dark, but rather exciting way to end this whole album that fits in so nicely with the aquatic theme presented throughout. Truly wonderful stuff. My goodness though, I have to say I really enjoyed this album a lot more than I was expecting to. So I mentioned it briefly. The album describes the music. Was it Shattered Talisman Topology? No, Out Like a Candle, Shattered Talisman Topology, which is an album that the randomizer selected to be reviewed in another user-suggested content episode that I'm still working on. Basically, I need to finish the script, but I need to get everything together to make the episode for it. After facing that particular album by Describes the Music and struggling with it for a long time in preparation for the episode in terms of writing about it, I have to say, when this one came up on the randomizer, I was a bit disheartened. I wasn't looking forward to another electronic music experience. But Stay Down by Two Lone Swordsmen, it really taps into the kind of things that I actually enjoy from the genre, putting me back into a place where I feel like I can appreciate everything once more. For me, it's kind of like a combination of the strange esoteric sound design of Aphex Twin, with this almost trip-hop vibe that makes everything so delightful and fun for me. Like, the tracks themselves are very strange, especially in terms of the literal sounds used to generate the compositions, a lot of squelchy noises and weird broken beats, but it all just contributes so nicely to the overall experience of just being underwater and marvelling in all of the colours of everything you see all around you. And I have to say as well, I adored the album artwork on this one. There's something that just has to be said for album artwork that just matches the vibe of the music. And the cover designed by one James Woodbourne, who has done a handful of album artworks for various releases on Warp Records, it seems. It opted to match the music so perfectly with this vignette of these two scuba divers trying to blast their way through a locked door on a submerged tanker ship. It just throws the vibe of the album our way perfectly, of this strange electronic world that feels very washed out in a delightful way. But overall, this album has just been so much fun to listen to, like these wonderful groovy moments, these kind of weird ominous moments as well, and then this gorgeous vibe that is presented through so much of the music. Like, I have to say, one that has surprised me in a delightful way and has reminded me of the kind of things that I really enjoy in electronic music. Like, I feel like my tastes are very particular when it comes to the genre, but when it hits and I really enjoy it, man, do I really enjoy it, I have to say. A truly wonderful album and a wonderful suggestion. And so yeah, I think with that we will come to the end of our episode of Weird Music. A wonderful suggestion of Stay Down by Two Lone Swordsmen from channel supporter God Zilla. It's funny because they suggest this one twice, it seems, alongside a whole host of other things, but the randomizer chose this one to review, and hence why we had a look at it. So very cool stuff. But yeah, I definitely like this one, just the constant groovy electronic tunes to get lost within, and some nice experimentation within the confines of IDM music as well. Very awesome. So yes, if you've made it this far into the video, and you, let us know in the comments then, what's one of your favourite releases on Warp Records is then? My knowledge of Warp Records is only the likes of Aphex Twin, for example, so I don't really know a lot about them. So yeah, anything else we should be suggesting and looking into from the label, yeah, let it know in the comment. If you don't have one, then just let us know what we should add to the randomizer for potential future episodes. Like, who knows what it's going to select? It's random every time. It might end up being your suggestion, who knows? But yes, with that, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. I wish you all the best, take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.